why don't we just teach those fossils really are old, the devil put them there. And seriously, there are people who argue this. We can invent contrived controversies about just about anything. But what we need to do is have a body of evidence to support them before we put them in the classroom. Okay, next slide. Here's the other strategy. Okay, so far what I've said is they pander to Christianity, they associate bad science with Christianity, which is both a disservice to science and also, if you're a Christian, you should be kind of pissed off at this because now it's tying really stupid ideas to Christianity. St. Augustine warned us about something like this a long time ago. The other is pretending that we should give them equal weight when they haven't earned that weight. And the other one that they're pushing a lot now, that you'll find in many bills that are going before Congress and before state congresses all over the place, is let's mandate teaching the weaknesses of evolution. Let's teach all the problems of evolution. To which all the biologists here are probably thinking, well, what problems are those? Can you tell me what those are? And no, they can't. I'll show you some examples in a minute of a few that they throw out. But really, there are some big holes in evolution. We will really admit that because if there weren't, biologists would be out of a job. We love to fill in those gaps. That's one of the things we're doing. We're constantly studying and figuring out what's going on in the missing bits of evolutionary theory. But fundamentally, the core of the theory is strong. We don't have any arguments with that. So when they say teach the weaknesses, they're going to be inventing a group of weaknesses. There are a number of textbooks out there that are being pushed by the Discovery Institute, which have at their core this approach. Let's make arguments about weaknesses of evolution. And when you analyze those books, what you discover is that all their weaknesses are completely invented. They're totally false. So it's really annoying to think of these books being thrown at students who aren't prepared to argue with them. To say that there are these imaginary weaknesses and push those on people. Okay, next slide. I want to talk a little bit about the Discovery Institute and Intelligent Design here because although it's a small group, they're relatively influential because lots and lots of other creationist groups love to steal their argument. The reason they like to steal those arguments was illustrated in the Dover trial a few years ago, which some of you may remember, in which a school district tried to force the reading of a statement about evolution and creation in the classrooms and sued, and there was a big lawsuit. It went to the High Court of the state of Pennsylvania, and they hammered this, and they dissected all the reasons why this was going on. And they discovered that what was happening were all these people who were ardent Christians who wanted to promote Jesus in the classroom, appropriated intelligent design's literature, and just started saying, well, we got to teach the weaknesses. It's only fair. Those things I just talked about. Okay, well, what is intelligent design? And you wouldn't trust me to give you the definition of intelligent design, right? So I've taken the definition of intelligent design straight from Stephen Meyer, who is a fellow of the Discovery Institute, so presumably he knows what he's talking about. And here's what he says it is. Okay, he says intelligent design is not religious-based. Despite the fact that everybody at the Discovery Institute is a fervent Christian, they're putting up this facade again of being not religious, and that it's an evidence-based scientific theory, one that challenges strictly materialistic views of evolution. And right away, I can tell you there's a contradiction. They're trying to challenge materialism. Now, materialism in this philosophical sense doesn't mean collecting the most toys, okay? It doesn't mean having a nice house and a fancy car and the high-end Xbox and all this kind of stuff. No, what we mean here is just scientific explanations have to use a material basis. That you can't invent imaginary beings through diddling your experiments. That you have to explain everything in terms of cause and effect, material agents, natural processes. So there's the contradiction. He's saying they're against that, but he's also saying they've got evidence. Think about it. What is their evidence? They won't tell you. Hey, this is a problem. They won't tell you processes again, which they're opposing. The other thing they do is they claim that there are telltale features of living systems that reveal design. And they've got a couple of ideas that they present, they'll talk about next. Go to the next slide. This is Stephen Meyer again. And what his big thing, what a bunch of these people's big thing is go into the scientific literature. If you go to the scientific literature, you discover many scientists who are doing things like looking inside cells and saying, ooh, wow, this is really complicated. There's tons of stuff here. It's amazing. It's very detailed. When I teach students, I teach a developmental biology course. We've got to go through all these biochemical pathways, and they practically cry at all this stuff you've got to learn to understand what's going on in the body. It's really, really complicated. We've never denied that. And what they do is they say, oh, well, there's all this stuff in there. There's things like turbines, major pumps, clamps, etc., etc. There's no way that could be all. It must have been designed. When, if you go to the papers that these people are talking about, where they're citing to show evidence of complexity, many of these papers do carefully explain how this evolved. So it's kind of ignoring that part of the story. The other thing they do is they play games with words. If you go to the next slide, this is Mike Behe. And I just have to point this, I teach a liberal arts college where we understand things like the English language. I'm sure you do too, right? Yeah. Okay, you do too. And one of the things I have to point out is that Mike Behe doesn't know what literally means. Because he says literally, inside cells, there are little trucks and buses and traffic signals and outboard motors. No, there aren't. There are really interesting, complicated proteins. I'll mention a few of these proteins later that fit together and carry out specific functions. But they aren't designed, they're evolved. And we can, in many cases, but not all cases, again, that keep us biologists employed for a long time. But in many cases, we can explain where they came from. Okay, next slide. This is what a cell is like. Who remembers Rube Goldberg? Am I dating myself? Okay, some of you do. Old cartoons, they were very entertaining because Rube Goldberg machines are the elaborate, complicated machines that do very simple things in very elaborate ways. And here's a case of, here's how you get a glass of orange juice in the morning. Fresh squeezed orange juice is you've got your milk bottle on the door sill, or the windowsill. This was back when you had milkmen come around and cut 50 bottles of juice. So the milkman comes along, pulls out the bottle, and what that does is it's a little wire goes up there, and it makes that sword reach over and cut the guillotine, which cuts that rope, which makes this log slam the door shut, which cuts the bottom off the orange, and also startles the poor parrot up there, who pulls on the nut that makes the boot kick the octopus, and the octopus gets angry and squeezes the orange juice. That is biology. Any of you biologists here, you know this. You look at the cell, it's amazingly complicated, but it is weirdly complicated. It's got all these fairly arbitrary things that are working together in ways that no sensible engineer would do things, but it works. We're Rube Goldberg machines. Okay, next slide. Here's an example, and I picked this example not because it's in a field I'm particularly well versed in. And this is from biochemistry. This is the blood clotting pathway, and it's one of the favorite examples of intelligent design creation. And the blood clotting pathway is fairly complicated. It has to be. Okay, you know you've got this red stuff flowing in your veins, and you want it to clot only when you cut yourself or suffer some other injury. You don't want it to clot just by happenstance any old time it's flowing through the vein, because then you get things like thrombosis, you get things like strokes. You don't want this to happen. It's got to be a very tightly regulated system. And what you find when you look at the blood clotting pathway is that there's a couple of pathways. There's an intrinsic pathway that deals with internal effects, things like rough spots in arterial walls and so forth, and causes responses there. And what it does is it triggers a cascade of protein changes. Each of these little numbered boxes